The ability to self-replicate or reproduce is a fundamental property of all life forms. Reproduction relies on cell division. Up until now, we've only discussed types of cell division that produce identical daughter cells. Many organisms reproduce asexually, and they would use one of those types of cell division for reproduction. For example, bacteria reproduce via binary fission, while eukaryotic yeast cells undergo mitosis in the process of asexual reproduction. However, as you know, many organisms reproduce sexually. This includes almost all animals, most plants, many fungi, and many of the eukaryotic organisms that we informally refer to as protists. Sexual reproduction produces offspring that are not identical to the parent. Instead, it combines genetic material from two different individuals to produce a genetically distinct individual offspring. Why do organisms reproduce sexually? Well, surprisingly, this is still an open question in biology. Here's the thing, asexual reproduction seems to make a lot more sense. Organisms that reproduce asexually don't need to waste energy finding a mate, possibly courting a mate, and they can reproduce essentially at any time. Evolutionary biologists talk about a concept called the twofold cost of sex when thinking about the pros and cons of sexual reproduction. One part of the twofold cost of sex is that males in a sexual population generally do not give birth or bear offspring, whereas in an asexual population, every individual is theoretically able to reproduce by itself. So for example, if every individual who's capable of bearing offspring produces exactly 2 offspring, our population is going to double every generation in an asexual population. However, let's consider a sexual population. If half of the population is male and unable to bear offspring, in this case, the population will stay the same size since half of the individuals do not bear offspring. The second part of the twofold cost of sex is that in asexual reproduction, each individual passes on its entire genome because the daughter cells are identical. In contrast, sexually reproducing organisms only pass on half of their genome because that half is combined with half of a genome from another individual. So, given these drawbacks, why is sexual reproduction so incredibly widespread in multicellular and even in some unicellular eukaryotic organisms? Well, as I mentioned, this is still an open question. But the leading hypothesis is that sexual reproduction shuffles the underlying genes such that it produces more phenotypic variants in the next generation. In other words, genetic variation can be combined in new and unique combinations through sexual reproduction. Now, keep in mind that mutation is always the ultimate source of variation, but sexual reproduction shuffles the variation that mutation produces into new combinations. Why does that matter? Well, if you live in a changing environment, and newsflash, we all do, more combinations means a greater chance that some individuals have a combination of genes that give them greater fitness, some advantage under the new conditions. Sexual reproduction requires 2 cells to unite and form a single cell that is called a zygote. You may have also heard a zygote referred to as a fertilized egg. The union of the 2 cells is called fertilization. In humans, the gametes are the egg cells and the sperm cells. Humans are diploid organisms, meaning that they have 2 copies of each type of chromosome. When a human or other diploid organism goes to reproduce sexually, it must first produce gametes. Gametes, eggs and sperm, are made by a special type of cell division called meiosis. The special thing about meiosis and what differentiates it from binary fission and mitosis is that it reduces the number of chromosomes. It cuts them in half. Diploid organisms produce gametes that are haploid. In other words, they have only 1 of each type of chromosome in a gamete. So for humans who have 46 chromosomes, the gametes that are produced by meiosis will have 23 chromosomes. When fertilization occurs, the 2 gametes become a single cell, the zygote, which has 23 plus 23 chromosomes for a total of 46. So that zygote is therefore diploid, and it is the first cell of the new organism.